Hello and welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast, number 250, 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. My name is John, and joining me today is Ryan. What's up, Ryan?
Not much. We only missed that 40th anniversary by, give or take,
7
three
seconds.
or 4 months.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. The 40th anniversary was in May, and it's June right now, so
Okay.
we're like a month off. Yeah.
Well, it's the end of June.
Well, the end of June does not 3 or 4 months make, okay?
Okay.
We're like
Okay.
6 weeks.
It
say
just
6
seems
weeks.
like it's old news, this this whole Return of the Jedi thing.
It's true. The moment has come and gone to a certain extent. In fact, I think the Star Wars podcasting and Star Wars Twitter and Star Wars discourse world or whatever is all aflutter about Indiana Jones right now. So that seems to be the topic of the trending topic, I suppose, in the world of Star Wars discourse.
Well, I didn't know Indiana Jones was part of the Skywalker saga. News to me.
Oh, well, it's not part of the Skywalker saga, but then again, neither is, say, The Mandalorian, right? So, you may want to rephrase that. Yeah.
Okay.
But of course, there is a great deal of overlap, and I am very excited to see Indiana Jones, but I'm not going to see it on opening day. I have to wait a few days because I'm going to be in Mexico next week, which is why we got to get this episode recorded today. I'm going to be in Mexico this week, and Indiana Jones comes out this weekend. So when I get back, I will be going to see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and then I will report back to you, Ryan, and let you know what I thought about it, because
Okay.
I'm pretty sure you're not planning on attending
Not
the
terribly
film.
interested. Yeah.
Yeah. I am terribly interested, so I'm gonna load up the iPad with some Indiana Jones movies for the flight, and kind of get myself all geared up. But enough on Indiana. Let's talk about Return of the Jedi. Yeah, so we were busy, and we were talking about other things around the time of the anniversary. Neither of us were able to get to the theater for the big 40th anniversary re-release. Although, you know what? I wouldn't call it a big 40th anniversary re-release. I would call it a tepid 40th anniversary re-release, which is why I didn't make it to the theater, because it didn't even play in my town. So
Yeah.
it wasn't like a super wide release. It was like I don't know why. I think they could have really just shown it everywhere, and a lot of people would have loved to have gone to see it. So, but anyway, we didn't get out to that, so we're taking our time, but we do want to celebrate Return of the Jedi and just talk about the movie. Obviously, it's a super important one to the Star Wars saga, and a movie that I love and have watched many times. But we haven't talked that much about it probably on this podcast. We started during the sequel era. Lots of talk of the sequels and the production of those movies and the reception of those movies. And we've talked about lots of other less timely topics. We've looked back at the whole decade of the 1990s, talked about some of our favorite video games, books, comics, etc. But I don't think we've ever really gone back and looked at a movie that wasn't a current movie and just devoted an episode to it that I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think weirdly, I would say the original trilogy is probably what we've spent the least amount of time on over the course of this podcast, which I think it has a bit to do with our ages and, just other things. But yeah, I don't know. It was kind of weird, actually rewatching this movie critically, because I've just never done that with OT stuff. In the same way, I did as a teenager with the prequels, which were very under fire, and it was you kind of just by being a certain age, you were kind of just watching those critically, I think. And then obviously with everything in the Disney era as adults. But yeah, I never really had looked at Return of the Jedi through a critical lens. I had feelings and thoughts about it, but it was an interesting experience, I guess.
That's a good point, and one that I probably hadn't thought about. But yeah, I was the movies were in the air, right? They were of the culture growing up. So like, they were kind of always around. But then I really first sort of fell in love with Star Wars as a preteen, I guess, or like maybe middle school, early high school age. And I don't think I was quite at the point where I was like watching movies more critically or whatever. I don't think I really started doing that too much until like very, very end of high school or like maybe beginning of college. Which is funny because my son is 13 and he's like Mr. Movie Critic for sure already. But no, I wasn't watching movies like that until I was a little older. And so, I think I just accepted the original trilogy as the truth. You know what I mean? And still kind of do, but yeah, we'll get into that. So yeah, that's an interesting point. I rewatched the movie as well, kind of to get ready for this. And but I don't think I really watched it any differently. I might not be capable of of like watching it too critically. I don't know. I've also been reading the making of Return of the Jedi on my iPad. I just kind of read those books slowly. I think I read the making of Star Wars like a long time ago when it first came out, and then I've looked at Empire and Jedi, but never. Well, I have now read making of Star Wars, reread Making of Empire. I kind of read that for the first time completely, and now I'm reading the Making of Return of the Jedi completely as well right now. So, but just kind of doing it like maybe getting through like a chapter every few weeks or a chapter a month or something. So just kind of going slowly through that when I have a few minutes to pull out the iPad and take a look at that book. So, but that's been interesting because I'm learning more about the process of making Return of the Jedi as I'm reading that as well. So that's giving me a little new insight. But yeah, it's. I mean, I have more critical thoughts about the movie as the years go on, I guess, but I don't know that I can just sit down and really watch it super critically because it's like you just know it too well, almost.
Yeah, it's hard to be objective, and like it's funny too because like really like one of the first like Star Wars criticisms I was like exposed to, which I'm sure was probably the same for you, was the offhanded remark in Clerks about all Jedi had was a bunch of Muppets. And I like semi-internalized that, but like was just like, oh, whatever, that's just, Kevin Smith saying he likes Empire better. Like, but then it's weird because like as the years would go on, I would like it took a very long time for me to be exposed to like criticisms of the original trilogy because they were just so like enshrined for so long. And then finding out like, oh, people hated Ewoks? Weird. Like people hated them. Like hated. And like they couldn't watch the movie. Like they dismissed the whole movie because of it. And then like but then there's also still like, then there's like the other side of like, no, the original trilogy is perfect. Every moment is perfect. It's everything that came after that's terrible. Like, and so like, I don't know, like somewhere in between all of that is like the truth about Return of the Jedi, which we will be uncovering in this episode.
Is that what we're doing in this episode? We're uncovering the truth about Return of the Jedi. Oh, fun. Okay, cool. All right, well, I kind of prepared just a few loose talking points here for us, but I don't know. I didn't want to structure it too much in terms of just a movie we know and love so well, but I thought we could start off by just talking about like where does this movie fall for us in terms of Star Wars movies, Star Wars stories, maybe even just like original trilogy. Kind of where does this one fall for you in terms of like your favorites as far as the Star Wars movies go, or is it one of your favorites? Is it one of your least favorites? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I would say like overall in like all the Star Wars movies that exist as of right now in 2023, it's kind of at like probably like right at like middle, like a little below the whatever the average would be, and like I can recognize like objectively this is probably like this is a probably a better movie than like The Phantom Menace. But I like The Phantom Menace more than this movie. So like it would be like a little bit probably below it would probably be like right below that. But like above Attack of the Clones and but just like that kind of area. I would say like sandwiched between like Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones would probably be like where it would fall for me, and that would be like the middle bottom-ish of all the rankings. So like obviously it would be like my least favorite of the original trilogy as well.
Interesting. Yeah. It used to be really fun to like rank Star Wars movies, like when there was only 3 of them, and it was just there was no internet of people to talk to, really. It was just like people you knew that you would rank Star Wars movies with. I thought that was fun. And then even when there was only 6 Star Wars movies, it was still pretty fun to like rank them, whatever. I don't think it's too much fun these days to rank Star Wars movies, just because like you hear of the whole world's rankings or whatever, and it ends up being like an argument and a competition and a fight and a way of like taking a jab at other movies. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of stopped being fun. To be
and the movies are so different now. Like like I would say like the Lucas movies are their like own kind of thing. And then like how do you compare like Return of the Jedi to Solo? Like what even is that comparison kind of thing? So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I don't like to get like super defined about it. Like, well, it's actually my 6th favorite of 11 or whatever. Like I used to like to do that, but I don't like to do that too much anymore. But I think I still like to look at it and kind of say like, well, where like overall, like how much do I love this one compared to some of the other ones or whatever. And I think this one's really interesting because like if I were to look at just the first 3, the original trilogy, and I'm asked like, okay, which is the best of them or whatever, like I feel like Return of the Jedi from a more objective perspective or just more like a film criticism perspective or whatever, I think it's probably the least impressive, I guess, of the 3 as just like a film, you know what I mean, with a capital F or whatever. But then like in other ways, I think like it's not my favorite of the original trilogy, but in other ways it's like it's kind of the most complete package of the original trilogy to me in some ways, so I do love it. I think it might be the most fun, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think it might be the most fun of the original trilogy. It's like if you just want like the complete sort of like OT adventure, but then it's also got some really big, powerful moments and some silly stuff. Like it's got a little bit of everything, I think. So I appreciate the movie, I think, a lot on that level. It's maybe in some ways it's maybe the easiest to watch as well, I think, which is another good thing about it. You don't think so?
I don't think so.
No?
I think that's like one of my biggest criticisms after rewatching it again. I think there are parts where the pacing just feels so off. Like there are parts that just drag in this movie that don't in A New Hope and Empire, and even the prequels. I think like all 3 of them are better paced than some parts in this movie, and I think that's kind of my overall feeling about this movie. Is it has some amazing moments, and it's obviously super important to like the Skywalker saga. It's maybe the most important movie to the Skywalker saga, but it also just like there's just parts where they're just like in one place doing one thing for like way too long. It feels like I don't know. Some scenes just kind of drag for me.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some of our favorite kind of parts of it, and then maybe move into discussing some of the critiques, like that one. But just as you started to say that, I'm like, I want to question you about like, well, which parts do you mean? But I'm thinking we should kind of look at the movie and favorite parts of it first, and then get into some of those critiques. So, because to me, when I think about Return of the Jedi, I think about the really, really fun, really, really cool opening third of the movie on Tatooine, which I think is like just Star Wars wish fulfillment in a really cool way. You know what I mean? Like the Empire Strikes Back.
And in a really creepy way too. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, okay. That's not what I was. I didn't mean like, man, I've always been wanting to see Leia in a like. I didn't mean like that kind of wish fulfillment. I meant like Empire Strikes Back ends with, Han in carbonite, and Luke is has kind of lost to Darth Vader and barely escaped with his life, and it's a really dark and kind of cliffhanger sort of ending. And then this movie picks up, and it's like, okay, yeah. Han is in carbonite there, but we've got all of our heroes are launching this rescue mission, and then like once he comes out of that carbonite, you kind of know this is moving in the direction that a positive direction and like a fun, adventurous, kind of direction. Even to think of like a movie like Raiders of the Lost Ark, speaking of Indiana Jones, earlier, it's such a fun adventure from beginning to end, that movie Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I kind of feel that kind of vibe in Jedi in a number of places, but especially in the opening third, where it's like, how are we going to get out of this situation? And we're just barely going to skate by the skin of our teeth. And like, Han's hanging upside down and can barely see, and Lando's getting pulled down by the Sarlacc, and yet he's gonna fire off that shot at the leg or whatever, the tentacle pulling it down. It's just like kind of really fun adventure, and I think it's very satisfying in a popcorn, kind of very simple, fun way to have all of the gang back together like that and have them carry out this like little mini movie in the first third, rescuing Han, seeing Luke walk in and in the robe and having that confidence of like, telling Jabba like, well, you could profit from this or you could die, it's up to you. And just, yeah, I just love it. I love that opening third. And I think it's a really, really great little mini movie within the larger, movie of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. I think I really like it on paper. I think it just lacks some punch, especially at the beginning, and I don't think it really ramps up until you get until Han is released, and then you start getting the banter between everyone, and I don't know, like, it's not necessarily a bad thing that it's like a really like slow opening, but it kind of like, it feels like it kind of goes in circles a bit, and it's a little meandering for like the first like 15-20 minutes of it, and then it kind of like kicks in more, and you actually get like more character moments besides just a lot of standing around kind of stuff. I don't know. And because like those scenes, like I think those scenes would be fine if there was like, there's something about them that just like it lacks tension and urgency in those earlier scenes that, I don't know, like I was starting to, when I started the movie, I was like, oh man, this is a bit dull here for a while. And
have
it
you
just
gone back
like
and
not
watched...
engaging.
Have you gone back and watched Star Wars recently? The first third of that movie, like, because
I don't know. Yeah, I love that though, because it's just like, it's just rapid fire weirdness.
Okay.
And like, yeah, it's so bizarre, and like, and there's just, I think like there's a ton of dialogue, and people are talking about God knows what for the first like 20 minutes of Star Wars, and I don't know, like in the way it jumps around, like I think that's more interesting to me. But
well, I was with you. I'm with you when you say like it's just really weird. You know what I mean? And so it's very unique. And one of the things that you could say about Return of the Jedi, I think, is that it's in there's a few key ways in which it's not, but in a lot of ways it's very safe. You know what I mean? It's a very safe, like very straightforward kind of what you'd expect sort of adventure movie, you know what I mean? And so I think that's great, but I can also see that as a criticism of Return of the Jedi, whereas Star Wars certainly is weirder at times and also establishing everything, you know what I mean? So it's yeah, it deserves a lot of credit in that regard. And I love the beginning of Star Wars too, but it's like 5 minutes of characters talking, and then it's like 15 minutes or 20 minutes of like R2 and 3PO wandering around, not saying that much, getting picked up by like rats in robes, and then they're just like driving around in a tank with other weird robots, and like it's really weird. As you said, it's really weird, but like I don't know about a ton of dialogue in the opening of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, but there's the banter between 3PO and R2, and I don't know. I think it's like more visually interesting, even though there's like a lot of aliens and stuff in the beginning here. I don't know.
Well, and that is one thing about Return of the Jedi. I think, you know, we talk all the time, and everybody talks all the time, I guess, about The Force Awakens, how it's a little bit of a, it's a new movie, but it's also, what do they call them in Scream? Like a requel? Is it a requel? Is that what they're talking about in Scream? Maybe not. Like I forget what they call them, but like, you know, it's the idea that like, yes, it's a continuation of the story, but it's also in some ways almost a remake of the original movie. And like Return of the Jedi is not that, but you know, Star Wars opens up on Tatooine. So does this movie. Star Wars ends with an assault on the Death Star. So does Return of the Jedi. You know what I mean? It does kind of, it was doing that sort of Force Awakens thing, maybe to a little bit lesser extent, but it was doing that like already only 6 years after Star Wars came out, you know?
Well, yeah. I mean, that was the, you know, the George Lucas rhyming. And I think it was like, you know, very intentional on his part. Like it even, like Return of the Jedi opens with the underbelly of a ship, like in the same way Star Wars does. And it is like I all that stuff was like very, very intentional. And I think it's, I don't know, like I I think stuff like the Death Star 2 and Starkiller Base, I think there's like arguments for those things like being like making sense, and then there's like also like I get why people are like, this is ridiculous, like at the same time, I don't know, but it is like, it is something that's kind of permeates throughout the whole movie, and like even in like lines of dialogue with you know, the I love you, I know being flipped, and like just all kinds of stuff. Like it was you know, like Lucas was definitely like meant for the, you know, well, whether he did or didn't mean for this to be like his final statement on Star Wars, it was kind of like, we're bringing everything together. Like every thread is going to be brought together so that it's like this complete story. And then we're also, you know, going to have these like allusions to the other films, specifically the first one, to just make it feel whole. Yeah.
And I think like the second Death Star is something that's super. It ended up, I was just reading about this in the last month or so in the making of Return of the Jedi. It ended up being a very smart choice in terms of, because like certainly there's the tendency for people to be like, well, that's just rehashing what you already did in at the end of Star Wars, you know? And there is, I guess, some of that, but at the same time, they were trying to sort of break, how are we going to like bring everything together at the end of this movie, and how are we going to make this all work, because we have all these different irons in the fire, and we have to like find a way to, you know, and a lot of the end of the movie was going to be on Coruscant actually, and not the second Death Star. And it was like, you know, fairly late into the development and writing process that they kind of came on, like figured out like, okay, we should just move everything here to like this. If we do it another Death Star, we can move, you know, the Emperor there and the confrontation with Luke there, and then you're gonna have the space battle outside of the Death Star, and like brings everything together in a way that like really works and makes a lot of sense. But It wasn't always like the plan to do that second Death Star. In fact, they were really looking for ways to resist that for a long time, I think. And then it's just sort of realized like this actually is going to make the most sense and be the most direct way to kind of conclude the story. So, yeah, I think it did work out well in that regard. But yeah, for a long time it was going to be, we were going to see Coruscant in Return of the Jedi. And part of it was, I think it made the script more straightforward and kind of tight to move things to a second Death Star. But then I think another part of it was, another part of it was budgetary considerations. And it was like, we could do this a lot cheaper if we don't have to create Coruscant. So, yeah. And there was a lot of pressure, as there was on all of the Star Wars movies, in terms of budget, because it was self-financed and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so opening section, we talked about a little bit. I guess the next third of the movie is where, I have a little more kind of critiques, or it doesn't work quite as well for me, the sort of middle parts of the movie. Really, I guess it's the mission to Endor, which is like not quite my favorite part necessarily, but not because I don't like Ewoks. But I feel like a little bit of the pacing issues and stuff there in the middle of the movie, maybe a little more than I do in the beginning.
One thing that I think is like kind of an elephant in the room that I do think we should address before.
Oh, you want to talk about Leia?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I don't know. Like, this is something that has been talked to death. But, and, I've heard, like, literally I feel like I've heard every argument about the slave bikini Leia stuff. I've heard why it's problematic. I've heard why it's empowering. And, maybe it's somewhere in the middle on that, or maybe it is one of those things. But I will say, like, it did lead to, just like growing up as a Star Wars fan in the 90s, I think it, like, I don't know, it did lead to, like, some general, like, just creepiness in the Star Wars fandom, I think. And I don't know, it has, like, this very weird legacy where I think, like, mostly at this point, like, it's just kind of swept under the rug. Like, they don't make Slave Leia toys or anything anymore. I mean, they don't make, like, Leia toys, it seems like, these days. But, yeah, they kind of, it's just kind of, like, not a thing that's, like, front and center. But I do remember for a while in, like, the 90s, like, it was definitely a thing. And, over the years, like, people have been kind of, like, weird about it in the past. So,
100%. I mean, I think it's kind of an odd impulse or whatever, like on the part of the writers or on the part of George or whoever it is, like to be like, we should probably like put her in the least amount of clothes as possible. In that scene, like I'm not really sure like I can sort of see to a certain extent, like Jabba is this villain. Jabba is, going to be like, it makes him more villainous, I suppose. You know what I mean? Like that's how he's treating her and forcing her to wear that and literally chaining her to him. And like, she's this trophy for him or whatever. It is the bad guy, doing that. So, that's not cool. But, still a writer has to, and the filmmakers have to say like, okay, we're going to do this to this actress. You know what I mean? We're going to make Carrie Fisher, kind of, wear this clothing and whatever, and or lack of clothing. And it's like, that's kind of odd, I guess. I'm just trying to think of it from the creative perspective, like seeing myself saying, okay, I have this actor who's working for me. And I'm developing this script. This is what I'm going to make her do. That feels like a weird like decision and impulse, But then that being said, like within the film, I guess the other angle on it is like it's this really awful creature villain who forces her to be in that position, and then she ultimately, obviously, like destroys him and kind of takes that power back from him. So you could say like, okay, well, it's cool in that regard, obviously this is a discussion that people have had many, many times over the years and whatever. And I think Carrie Fisher's talked about like the satisfaction of being able to strangle Jabba and kill him. And so that's all cool. Yeah, I think really like maybe, and like you said, almost more problematic than the text of the movie itself is just like what people did with it. And specifically, like I feel like what teenage boys and like young adults in the 90s did with it, you know, and maybe it was grown men too, but like I just gotta say, like I said, like my coming of age and like sort of like learning to love Star Wars was when I was like a teenager. And I think like a lot of like teenage boys like loved Star Wars in the 90s, and it was a weird thing where it's like, yeah, everybody, well, not everybody, but like a lot of people culturally just latched onto that and like turned it into this whole like weird thing. And it got kind of creepy for a while there. I feel like now it's like sort of evened out where it's, people don't talk about it that much, like you said. And there was this moment of 5 or 10 years where it was like, that was like the thing, you know what I mean? That everybody talked about and made a big deal about. And there were so many like dumb jokes in movies and probably Family Guy or The Simpsons, or, you know what I mean? Like, it was just like a thing like that was constantly. And like, I feel like now it's like, okay, well, this is a moment in the movie. It's weird, you know, I'm sure it causes some discomfort. It's maybe not the best choice, but I think like the worst of it, we've gone through the worst of it, and now we're like on the other side, you know?
Yeah. And it is just like, also just like, it's very strange for Star Wars, because like George Lucas is not a dude whose films are like dripping with sexual subtext, and like they're not meant to titillate in any way. And so like it is kind of just this like weird thing that exists in those in those movies,
right? Which I mean to a certain extent might kind of make me a little more what's the word, I don't know, just make me more likely to believe that it wasn't really designed with like a super creepy intent, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's not like what he does with his movies, right? So yeah.
But yeah, I think it's just like intent versus impact, where like I think like I think the intent is for it to be empowering. I think the impact is a lot of dudes were real weird about it.
Sure. That's probably a good way to boil it down. Yeah.
But
not to keep making everything about Indiana Jones, but I think like if you look at like, you know, the script for Indiana Jones and the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, and definitely Temple of Doom for sure, there's like stuff in there that probably is pretty offensive, but I think most of the time probably the intent was overall pretty positive, but like clumsily handled in some cases for sure, you know, and that's probably probably part of what's going on with the slave Leia, with the Hutt Slayer Leia, as she's now known. So
yeah,
better
ring to it.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about like the middle section of the movie, I suppose. We're kind of talking favorite parts and critiques at the same time, sort of. So let's just go through chronologically. Middle section of the movie, you have the scene the scenes where Luke returns to Dagobah, which I think are really great, really, really great. And
my favorite scenes in the movie.
Is that right? Okay, all right.
I love this. I think it's like some of the best Yoda dialogue, the best Yoda wisdom. The conversation with Obi-Wan is so good. It's such like a huge character moment for Luke. It's also like, you know, it's so many of the ideas and themes of Star Wars like being like spoken aloud here. And I still think like these, like I still had like goosebumps during these scenes, like rewatching it, you know, last week, and just really powerful, amazing stuff here.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think I love Yoda in Empire as well, obviously, and that's where he has more time on screen and more time to kind of shine or whatever. But like the sort of the bittersweet kind of return to Dagobah, to kind of have one last interaction with Yoda, and just I think it's Mark Hamill's performance is fantastic in these scenes, and there's been a lot of talk in the last 10 or 15 years about how that puppet only works and Frank Oz's performance only works because Mark Hamill is so good at selling it and making it believable, and I think that's true. But that's meant to preface the fact that, like, as I was watching that scene again this week, I was just thinking, like, there's the dialogue, or the delivery of the dialogue from Frank Oz is so perfect, and there's just this warmth and this wisdom, as you said, and a feeling of acceptance as well on the part of Yoda, that like the end of his time has come, and he's like very accepting of that, and yeah, it's just really beautiful. I mean, like, but he's playful as well, even in that acceptance of the fact that, like, he doesn't have much time left. The way he delivers the line, he says, like, "Look, I so old to you," I think, and Luke says, "Of course not," and he says, "Yes, I do." And it's just like this, like, there's this inflection in his voice that's just so, like, I don't know, it's perfect. It's perfectly delivered. And that whole thing, just like they're lit by the fire, and so there's that warmth in the lighting and the way the scene looks. And then, Luke is like, "Man, Yoda, you're looking rough, but I don't want to tell you that." And Yoda's like, "It's okay. I'm old. Like, yes, I'm almost, like, all of that is really great, I think." So.
Yeah. And I mean, this is probably like one of the times where, if not like the kind of like definitive Star Wars statement on like death and the afterlife in this section, and it does like really work, knowing that this is like the last film of the original trilogy, and like, it is a film of endings, but also like, what comes next, kind of thing. And yeah, there's like the amazing line from Yoda about the "soon I will rest, forever sleep, earn it I have," which is like so, I think that's even more powerful now after, we've, seen the prequels and everything. I think it is like one of those scenes in the original trilogy that are kind of elevated because of what George did with the prequels, and gave us more of like Yoda's story in those films. And so we do know like more about like his, all of the things he's done before just being like a creepy dude in a swamp in Empire, like, and so when like that, just, I don't know, that just hit like really hard for me when he's just like the "earn it I have" part, because it's like, yeah, dude, you have like oh my god, the amount of things you've done. And then and then there's the stuff with Obi-Wan as well. There's the certain point of view part, and like, obviously, like, this is Obi-Wan still like passing on wisdom, long after he's gone at this point. It's been 2 films, and it's like Luke kind of coming to terms with like just all of this, and then like, there's the stuff about his family and everything. Like, it's so much packed into this scene.
Yeah, for sure. Real quick before, because I want to talk a little bit about the Obi-Wan scene that follows the Vader scene there, or the Yoda scene there. But it just in kind of Yoda's sort of final moments there, I think the exchange is really really delicate and really delicately written. The way that Luke is pressing Yoda, like, I must know. Like, Yoda, is he my father? I must know. And Yoda's like, told you he did. This is unfortunate. And Luke's like, unfortunate that I know the truth, you know. And Yoda says, no, unfortunate that you rushed to face him, that not ready for the burden were you. And the reason I say it's, I don't know if delicate's the right word, but like, it's so perfectly executed and communicated. The performance is there, but also like, you go from Luke being like, look, bro, like, you got to tell me, like, is this true or not? And Yoda trying to like avoid it, you know, I gotta rest or whatever. I don't want, trying to avoid it, to, okay, fine, I'll acknowledge it, to Luke being angry, like, what, you think it's unfortunate that now I know the truth, that you don't get to hide this from me anymore, to just a few phrases Yoda is able to, I think, like, bring to help Luke understand, like, no, it's not about lying to you. It's not about hiding it from you. It's about, like, you know, shepherding you through this process to get ready for that, but you weren't ready for it yet, you know? And so, like, that is just, to be able to do all of that in the span of, I don't know how many, 30 words or something. I don't know how many words it is, but like, it's so efficient and so believable too. It's like, you know, and I think the stuff with Obi-Wan that follows is really good also, but it does feel a little bit more like we're, you know, communicating plot details and stuff. Whereas like the conversation between Yoda and Luke in that moment tells you everything you need to know, but it also just feels so like raw and so real and so just believable on an emotional level. So I really, really love every word of the Yoda Luke scene, but especially those final words there, or almost final words between them.
It's so tightly scripted. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah. And then as far as the Ben stuff, you know, I think something I appreciate there is, like, it is awkward because they have to kind of thread that needle of like, well, wait a minute. In the first movie, you said that Vader betrayed and murdered my father. And now you're like, no, he is your father. Like, that actually, like, the script supervisor must have like taken the day off, because like, that does not line up. Like, that's not like what you said before, you know? And they have to kind of like make it work, right? Which is something that George obviously had to do a lot more of with the prequels, but like, how do we make the thing we said before work with like what we want to do now, you know? And I think that's a pretty glaring example of it. But they do a good job of reconciling those things. And I think in doing so, there's also a lot of generosity of spirit, or like, Obi-Wan kind of displays like that Jedi mentality to a certain extent, because he's like, yeah, well, Vader sucks, but like, I still love your father, you know what I mean? Like, he was a good friend, he was a wonderful Jedi, all that stuff. So like, you know, he's not bitter in that moment. He's not like, yeah, that son of a bitch, you know, like he's like, your dad was a good guy, and so I told you that because what I said about your father was true. You know, he became Darth Vader, and that guy sucks. But like, your father, the person I was talking about, was a good person, and so I kind of really appreciate that element of it.
Yeah, and I think like that is just like, I mean, it is partially what you said. It is like the real world problems of like, you know, changing course a bit on a script over, you know, 6 years time, and a story. But I think, I don't know, like, it also, like, it kind of sets the table for all of Star Wars stories to come, where it is like, you know, these are stories from, you know, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, told by maybe sometimes unreliable narrators, and it all kind of depends on, you know, your point of view. Like, and I think that is just like a brilliant conceit on George's part, to be like, yeah, you know, it's perspective, it's a certain point of view, and it's just like, I think that's become such a part of Star Wars, and like, you know, some people are like, plot holes, retcons, whatever, but it's like, no, like, that's the spirit of these stories, like, and, you know, and that is all established here, and, you know, also, like, none of it's real. So, like,
Yeah.
calm down.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but I think that is just yeah, it is kind of like course correction in a way, but it's also like brilliant
Yeah.
on George's part.
Yeah, and then the final thing I love about this scene as well is the way that Luke is pushing back at Obi-Wan a little bit, because Obi-Wan's like, "Yeah, you got to go kill your dad," and he's like, "I'm not going to do it. I can't do it." And then I love Obi-Wan's resignation. Like, okay, the Emperor's already won. I mean, there's whatever. I love that, but I love that like there's that rebellious spirit to it, I guess, which is, the previous generation telling you this is how it's got to be done. And, Luke S saying, no, I'm going to forge my own path. You know what I mean? And I think that's something that's very present in Star Wars stories and George Lucas stories. And so I love the way that Luke is, and we see it with Rey, we see it with like all of the great, Star Wars heroes. I feel like there is an appreciation of that generation that came before, and there is a desire to learn from these mentor figures. But then you also, at a certain point, you have to make your own decisions, and you might have to push back against, some of the wisdom of that previous generation, and believe in yourself and follow your own intuition. And I think, obviously in the end of the film, we see that Luke was right to do that.
Yeah. And going back to another point you made, like, yes, this Ben scene is a lot of like plot dumping. But I think, because of this, and I do think it's like really well executed for, the purpose it serves, because it is also like amazing performances and like super emotional, but like this helps the end of the film work so well, because as the audience, you've got Ben and Yoda's words like kind of ringing in your head when you have all this stuff happening with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor, and the complexity of that scene, and it not being as simple as Luke just like picking up a lightsaber and like slicing through some dudes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Should we talk about the Endor stuff a little bit? Like, where do you land on that?
I think this is another place where the pacing takes a hit. I think I love the scene like right before they take off, where in the rebel base, and they're making the plans, and like there was so much of this. Like, I remember like it took me like so many viewings when I was younger to like really unpack like what is happening in here. Like, they have to go to the moon to disable the shields because they're being projected from the moon to this like Death Star, but don't worry, it's like it's not actually operational, but then there's like the twist that it is, and like I don't know, there's like so much, there's like it's kind of just weird, like all of it, like it's this very like we just needed to get like another planet in here or something. I don't know.
Well, I think my big critique is that, and I do, like I said, this is in some ways the easiest Star Wars movie to watch of the original trilogy or whatever to me, because I just feel like it's like there's fun to be had in almost all of the movie, and if you're looking for big emotional beats, it definitely has that. If you're looking for great action sequences, it has that. And so anyway, I think it's really great in that regard, and I think the Endor stuff, like, I enjoy watching it. I am not at all somebody who like doesn't like the Ewoks or thinks it's stupid that the Ewoks help the rebels win there and any of that. Like, I loved all that stuff. I think it's really fun, but I think sometimes it feels a little bit like you're watching this story unfold with Luke and Vader and the Emperor and even the fleet up in space or whatever, and then like we'll cut to back to this stuff happening on Endor, and like every once in a while it kind of feels a little bit like, well, we didn't really have anything for Han and Leia to do, so we had to kind of create this whole part of the movie so they'd have something to do, you know. And I guess you could have just put them up in the command ship where Akbar is, or, you know, had Han in the Falcon with Lando. I mean, and there's things they could have done, but it feels a little bit at times like this part is, you know, as you get towards the middle, but especially as you get towards the end of the movie, it's like the story that is really powerful and moving and exciting to follow is like what's going to happen between Luke, Vader, and the Emperor, you know. And then obviously Han and Leia bringing the shield generator down is very important to the plot and the story overall, but you know, it doesn't necessarily feel like there's much like character wise that needs to be accomplished with them, and so there's this whole Endor thing that just kind of like is what we're gonna have them do, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think and like there's so many classic like amazing moments on Endor that like and I think it's a great place for like the film and the trilogy to end eventually, but you know, I think the most egregious part of it to me is the first part of it. I have never liked the C-3PO like golden god thing part of it, and like the Ewoks like going to like roast everyone and like all of that stuff, like I think is, I don't know, like that part drags so much for me. I really dislike that part. It's ridiculous. I don't think like the humor really lands.
You don't think Harrison Ford trying to blow out the fire as he's like tied to that spit, like about to be roasted?
Yeah, I mean that part does, but like the little things, mostly from Harrison, are amazing. I mean, there's there's actually really good like Harrison joke moments in this, but I think like the general like absurdity of the scene, like just it doesn't really work for me, and it just like it takes so long. It just like absolutely kills the pacing after, like, you know, you have these back-to-back scenes of the first like the Dagobah stuff, and then you have this like the rebel briefing, and there's like this such a sense of urgency, and then it just like peters out here for like a while. And you know, and I think especially like rewatching this movie, which we've done many times, like you get to this part and you're like, well, I know what's gonna happen. There's like no tension here to begin with, and it's just a scene that like really drags too long. But at the same time, like you get these like really amazing scenes. Like I think the environment is amazing, and I love the way the Ewok village looks, and you know, it's famously supposed to be Wookiees and everything, but they couldn't do that, so George cut them in half and like everything. And I like that aspect of it, but like the speeder bike chases are amazing, and like those are just so cool. And I can't imagine seeing that stuff in the theater in 1983
as a kid. Yeah,
like there was like nothing with like that sense of like speed in there, and so like I wouldn't ever like trade the Endor stuff, but I feel like it drags at this part, and then there is also at times a very weird vibe once we get to like the combat part of the Endor scene, which I guess we're not like quite to yet, but that's my other kind of major complaint with.
I don't know. I think we're there. I think we're there.
Okay, so yeah. when they start fighting and stuff, yeah, I think like my issue here is like I like the kind of, you know, again, I don't know. You've been reading the Making of Return of the Jedi book, and you probably know more like behind the scenes stuff. But it always kind of came across like as soon as I was cognizant enough to kind of catch that George was like, oh, this is a response to Star Wars is in a way a response to like Vietnam and everything. Like it does feel like the Imperials getting bested in the woods by the native inhabitants here is like that most on display to me. I don't know. Is there conversation around that? Is that a common thing, or is that not
the idea that the Empire is kind of representative of like the American Imperial forces in Vietnam, and that the Ewoks are like the native kind of like forces, like the less. Oh yeah, I think there's a lot of talk of that. Yeah. Where George is like, I wanted to show that like, regardless of how much technology you have, how much money you have, how much of that kind of power you have, like you're not going to overcome as an imperial kind of like invading force. You're not going to be able to overcome the will of like a culture of people or a group of people who are ready to stand up and fight against that. Like the money and the tech is not going to do it. I think that's what definitely he was trying to communicate there for sure.
Okay. Yeah. And so I like that part of it, but I think like the vibe changes so much throughout that scene that it's like, because sometimes it's like totally played for laughs. There's like Ewoks bonking themselves on the heads with rocks and like all this like ridiculous stuff, and then there's like Ewoks murdering stormtroopers with sticks, and then like Ewoks getting killed, and like it's very weird because I love the Ewok designs. Like I love the Muppetness of them, but like it is kind of like, and I guess this is like a line that Star Wars constantly straddles of like being like jokey and then being like, no, all these people died. Like it's just like it's just tonally a little weird at times.
Yeah, I mean that's it's weird because like Star Wars is in some ways, which we're about to get to, but is in some ways a very like sort of like pacifist leaning or like non-violent leaning kind of story. But then it's also called Star Wars, and like we celebrate the X-Wings flying through and like blowing up like TIE fighters or whatever, and it's like you see a cockpit like erupt into a ball of flames, and like there was a person in there and they just got vaporized. You know what I mean? Like it's not, or even like, I mean really probably the most like straightforward or most direct example is like the hero of Star Wars who goes on to become a Jedi, who are supposed to represent like defense, never attack, and all that kind of stuff. Like the hero of Star Wars wins the day by blowing up like a giant space station full of human beings. Like, you know what I mean? Like but it's presented as this larger than life story. It's this myth, and like you never really, I don't know, I just think the way that the story is told and the way it's put together, it's never really that realistic. It's too heightened to like to feel to sort of feel those things, and like that sounds bad, like, oh well, you should feel those things, right? But like not in this kind of story. I don't think that's the point, and so
it's video gamey in that way.
And you certainly feel loss and you feel the value of life on like an interpersonal level, but then like the backdrop is sort of like toy soldiers, you know what I mean? It doesn't feel super real. And I think it's okay.
And there's just like a Bond movie or something, there are just like there's like so much cannon fodder of like of just just there is like constant death and
Yeah.
like constant murder happening throughout Star Wars. I think it does hit a little bit different for me when it is like Ewoks. I don't know. For some reason, like I think it's like twofold because it's like I don't know because like it's like really goofy with the Ewoks, and then like but then like you're cheering for them, but then like then one of them dies, and you're like, oh, that feels a little icky. But then you're like, it's also very weird seeing them like murdering like humans too.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
best
know.
not to think about it too much because then you start thinking about, well, wait a minute, they were going to eat everybody. They were going to eat like all the people, which, yeah, it's just a little, yeah. And I think like even just to bring it back to the Vietnam thing, it's like, I think it's pretty clear, watching the movie, it's like, yeah, George conceptually was like, hey, I believe in, like, he's anti, at least in a theoretical sense, he's anti-imperialism, and you see that in the movies, and obviously drew some inspiration from looking at sort of like what happened with Vietnam and real world events. But I don't think like in the execution, the moment to moment execution, or even scene by scene execution or whatever, I don't really think that was a motivator anymore. I think it was more like, it feels more, as you watch the movie, it feels more like, oh, okay, so he looked at like Vietnam and thought, oh yeah, big imperial, highly technological government versus an ingrained group of people in their own land or whatever, and then like that provided him the big picture conflict,
Right.
and then from there he just wrote a Star Wars movie. You know what I mean? It doesn't really, or helped come up with Star Wars. It doesn't really feel like it's like every scene, every shot, every like kind of interaction is meant to actually be exploring this conflict, in the real world anymore. So
it definitely like it is like it's a thematic thing
yeah
that does kind of like fall apart or even like come across as like mean spirited if you like get down on like a granular like scene to scene analysis of it, like because then like because if you were like, oh yeah, the Ewoks are like definitely supposed to represent the Vietnamese people, then it's like, okay, so are you saying that they like eat people? Like that it becomes like a little
see, I don't think he's thinking about it that way.
But like thematically, big picture, yes. Like
right. Yeah.
But I think but then like just as like a viewer of the film, like even taking all that stuff like aside, like I do just I think like the shifts in tone through this scene are just they're just kind of weird. It's I don't know if like it I don't think this scene has like the intended I don't really know what the intended effect is. Like, should I be just like cackling and like throwing popcorn in the air like during this, or should I be like, oh, this is like serious war business happening right here? Like, because it does like it just kind of goes like back and forth. Like, I don't know. It's just like I like the idea of it and like the thematic part of it, but I don't actually like really get anything out of like watching the scene itself.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we should talk about the kind of conclusion of the movie. Although actually, one thing I was going to say about this Endor sequence and the cross cutting between this and the other kind of battles going on or whatever, I feel like there's a lot of it in the Phantom Menace in the final kind of third of the Phantom Menace, and I feel fairly similarly about this Endor stuff as I do the Gungan versus battle droid stuff in the Phantom Menace, which is to say I enjoy watching. I mean, I like this probably a little more than the Gungan battle droid stuff in the Phantom Menace, I guess, but like I enjoy both, and like when I'm watching the Phantom Menace I certainly enjoy that stuff, but it's a little like it's kind of a similar vibe thematically. You've got the the native people, the Gungans. They're they're aliens and they're kind of played for laughs a lot of the time, but they also overcome this, imperialist force and, whatever. So it's pretty similar in a lot of ways as far as that goes. And it does feel at times, just sort of like not a distraction, but like there's a bigger story I want to follow. And then we kind of keep cutting to this sort of more silly component of the overall larger conflict at the end of the movie. So, similar vibes there. I just thought of a term that I had not thought of for a very long time, Ryan, and I think it might be for the best. Star Wars ring theory. Remember all that talk of Star Wars ring theory?
God. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, yeah. I think there was some talk about the Phantom Menace and Return of the Jedi and how they connected with one another in the Star Wars ring theory, but I don't remember for sure. Kevin knew the ring theory stuff pretty well. He dug into it. I'm not saying he was like a true believer in it necessarily, but he found it pretty compelling and read a lot about it, I remember. So might have to ask him about that.
Yeah, I hadn't made the Phantom Menace comparison, but it really works. I mean, but like you kind of have like two goofy things going on in Phantom Menace, because you also have like the Anakin stuff where he's blowing up all the ships and like, what am I doing, like kind of thing, which is also like pretty silly too. But
yeah,
I don't know, like the Gungan battle droid stuff, like I don't know, like that scene never like feels weird to me. I don't know, in the way that this does. But
okay.
Not saying it's like better or worse, but like I don't have any other feelings about it. But it's funny that you're comparing the end of this film to Phantom Menace, because like I have like I was thinking of comparisons to Revenge of the Sith here, whereas like this does have like these kind of like goofy parts, but then it also has like this like very very serious and like thematically rich scene with the Emperor and Luke and Vader, and then like Revenge of the Sith, like you have it kind of has like both at once, when you have the conflict between Obi-Wan and Anakin, because like you have like the talking bits of that part are like really intense and thematically rich, but it also is like them jumping around on the lava is like ridiculous looking, and it's like so goofy, and it's like I guess it's like supposed to be fun and cool, but it also just kind of like makes me feel weird that they're like doing backflips over lava like while having this like insanely intense showdown with like some really like intense and big ideas. So I don't know, like there is kind of like a similarity there for me too, where it's like, man, I wish you would just like really lean into like the gravity of these moments at like the end of these films, like, and like just stop trying to make things fun for like 5 minutes and just like really go all in on this stuff.
Yeah, or if not fun, like cool, or like whatever. Because I don't know if they're trying to make it fun necessarily in the end of Revenge of the Sith, but they're definitely like. It makes me wonder what, like, say the conclusion of Return of the Jedi would have been like had George had digital technology available to him. Like how far would he have pushed it? How like heightened and extreme would he have made it? Because I think like to a large extent, one of the reasons the conclusion of this movie is so fantastic is that it is just contained and it's simple.
Yeah.
And it looks really great. Like, yeah. But like if George could have had like Luke and Vader confronting each other on floating hoverboards or something, maybe he would have. You know what I mean? I'm glad. Yeah. I don't know, but yeah, I love the end of Revenge of the Sith. I find it very, very emotional, very powerful. But I think if you would have, or if they would have like toned it down about 25% in terms of the spectacle of it all, that would have helped focus on the performances and the dialogue and that kind of stuff, which I think is all pretty strong there, pretty great.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But it's in a sometimes ridiculous backdrop, you know. So yeah. Okay, so we have just like the conclusion of this movie to talk about, but we also wanted to talk a little bit about Super Return of the Jedi, and I don't know if you had a chance to pick a favorite piece of Return of the Jedi merch or not, Ryan, but I almost feel like we could do this now as like a little intermission and then kind of conclude the episode by talking about the conclusion of the movie, because I have some big thoughts on that.
Okay.
What do you think?
Let's do it. This is the final statement on Return of the Jedi.
Yes, that's right.
We're solving the mystery of it.
So, Super Return of the Jedi. I played a little bit this week. Did you play through it again, or where did you?
Yeah, I played some of it. Yep.
It's really hard. It's a very hard video game.
It's so hard.
Yeah. It does have a password system though, right? So that helps a little bit, but like I can't imagine playing this. I did play it. I replayed all of it a few years ago. And I remember it was, punishingly difficult. And I think the password system is the only way I was able to get through it, or save states. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's probably the most impressive, like, visually and technically, of the 3 Super Star Wars games. But man, it's really hard.
Yeah. So this game was developed by Sculptured Software, who did like the ports of the Mortal Kombat games for like Super Nintendo, and they did a ton of WWF games back in the day. And obviously the Super Star Wars trilogy, which these games are really interesting to me because they do seem they're so ambitious. Like I think like these games, despite some unevenness to them, I think they are like beloved because of their ambition. I think all 3 of these games are super visually impressive. The audio is amazing. Just like the approximations of Star Wars music through the Super Nintendo sound chip is just, it's so good. It doesn't sound like anything else. And it's like this kind of thing that makes me really miss like when video game consoles were not just like this hodgepodge of like, cell phones and PCs, and they had like these very like distinct visual and audio like features / limits. Like you don't get games now that sound like games did on the Genesis, which sound completely different than the way games sound on like the Super Nintendo. And like it's just they're so unique, in having like the Star Wars filtered through the hardware is just amazing. And like you said, and then like on the visual side, these games also like make use of like the SNES's Mode 7 capabilities for these like pseudo 3D scenes, which are just like, again, it's like this kind of like visual look that's extremely muddy and like ridiculous looking in a lot of ways, but it is also like so unique to this hardware that these games feel like they just feel so intrinsically tied to the hardware.
Yeah, and like the hardware at the time too required a sort of stylistic and abstract sort of like take on the movies, which as you're talking about like the difference between what it felt like to play console games back then and now, not everything, but now like most things, especially if it's an interpretation of something else. So if it's like based on a movie or whatever, or based on a TV show or something else, like some other media, it's probably going to come pretty close to looking like the thing that
Right.
it's based on, and I miss like, it's just, there's something so fun and cool and exciting about seeing like I'm right now looking at some footage of Luke, making his way through the Death Star to get to, the throne room. And it just looks so cool. It just looks so, it's like, yeah, this is kind of like that movie, but obviously just somebody's interpretation of it, and somebody kind of taking what they saw in the movie and, kind of creating something inspired by it, but so different from it at the same time, but it's evocative of what you watched in the movie. And yeah, they're pretty special. I think they, as you said, they look and sound fantastic, but also they just have this great balance of capturing the look and feel of the movies and also being so weird and different from the look and feel of the movies. And like that balance, I think, is, really well executed, because they are special. They are unique. They have their own look and feel, but it's close enough. And they are ridiculous at times, but they are able to be ridiculous and kind of, be very video gamey, but still be close enough that it feels like this is Star Wars, just like dialed up, or like it's the Star Wars I know, but it's just kind of like pushed in this certain direction to a degree, and it's a pretty far degree, but it's enough that it feels, still really connected to the thing it's based on.
Yeah, they're like this like fever dream interpretation of the movies.
Yeah, and I love the Ninja Gaiden style, story, like cutscenes or whatever, the still images with the text underneath them to tell the story sequences. And they even kind of, there's like a little bit of motion, like they have layers there, or there's like a little bit of motion and movement in them, and yeah, it's super cool. But like right now, Luke is in the footage I'm watching, Luke is like totally fighting like a bunch of Imperial guards, and I never got to see that in the movie. You know what I mean? But I'm seeing it now, and it's really cool. And this like, again, I used the phrase earlier, but kind of like wish fulfillment video game. You get to like watch Return of the Jedi, these Star Wars movies that like by this time were a legend to us. You know what I mean? They were these films that were on TV all the time, and we knew, like, I knew my older brother grew up loving Star Wars, and your parents talked about seeing it for the first time and all that, and now I get to like play this video game where I just feel like a badass. And well, actually I feel like really defeated a lot of times while I'm playing it, because it's so hard, but you know what I mean? Like it's just really cool.
You can do flips and like cut through dudes for like 30 seconds before you die. And I think like this is, I don't know if Super Return of the Jedi is like the best of these games. This is something like I can't rank these three games, because they do feel like they are like similar in some ways, but they are also like iterative, but they do feel like this very like cohesive trilogy. There's not like a weird like, oh, that's the bad one, or like that's definitely the best one of these, like but I think like they did like really aim for the fences with Super Return of the Jedi. Like you have so many playable characters. Like you play as Luke, you play as Han, you play as Leia, Chewie, Wicket, like which is just very cool. I don't know if this has more or less stages than the other games. It's a lot.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember how many are in the other two either, but I do remember playing this one a couple of years ago when I was playing it and being like, whoa, this game is like goes on forever. There's a lot. Yeah.
And it has these different like modes of play. Like sometimes you're there's like a speeder bike part where it's like behind the back, and that's where you have the mode 7 stuff. You have a part where you're like flying the Falcon and you're like shooting, you're moving like a crosshair to like shoot in different places. And then the infamous, I posted some footage of this game on my Standard Definition Gaming Twitter account, and people, like so many people chimed in and were like, the last mission of this game is impossible. like the part where you're
Flying through
escaping
the
the
Death
Death Star,
Yeah.
and it's just like the most like chonky mode 7, just like approximations of like pipes and metal and stuff like flying at you in like a first person perspective. It's like super weird and super cool, and like, you know, but the most of the game is like a side scrolling action platformer. And which is pretty like, it's pretty hit or miss. I think some stages are better than others. It does have this like weird of the era thing where like Western platformers like where sometimes the stages were like really sprawling, where like you're like, there's not really that many places to go, but somehow I'm lost. Like it's weird, and I just died because I went over all the way to like this side of the screen, and I guess there was nothing there. I shouldn't have gone that way, and now I'm dead, kind of thing. But yeah, and it is like it's not like a super tight feeling game. Like it's not, you know, Castlevania or Mario in like the tightness of the controls and the hit detection and all of that. It's just kind of like a pretty like loose feeling game, but also like kind of punishing. But it is like it's so charming that and there's just, you know, there's just nothing else like it in the Star Wars game series. Because even like the 2D games that we get on like Game Boy Advance and like DS and stuff later, like those were a little, you know, those feel different than these because of the hardware in the era.
Yeah, and these just have like a very unique identity. You know what I mean? These three games, and I really enjoy the like Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS like side-scrolling Star Wars games. Like, you know, I love those games. The Revenge of the Sith game is really cool.
So good.
Yeah, but it does feel a little bit more like your standard kind of like you know, game based on a movie or whatever. And these just feel like. Yeah, they really have like a very strong identity of, you know, these are unique games with a you know, like they really felt like, or they feel like the team that made them put a lot of time into, you know, creating a unique, I don't know, gameplay style and look and all that kind of stuff, where it's like they feel very unique to themselves. And you know, some of the other like Star Wars licensed, you know, games from that era or from the following era, I guess, or even the Nintendo ones, the NES ones, they don't really have that same like sense of like identity.
No.
Like, this is a really unique individual experience. They just kind of feel more like, oh, that's like a Nintendo game. Like if you made a Star Wars Nintendo game, that's what it feels like. These don't just feel like any licensed game on Super Nintendo. They really feel, I'm struggling to put it into words exactly, but they have a very unique and a very clear identity to them.
Yeah, so. And there is like this cohesiveness and like just a level of ambition, which I think is what maybe the NES games, the JVC ones, kind of lack. I think you know, I'm a huge fan of the Famicom Star Wars game.
Famicom Star Wars has a sense of identity.
It does. And I was going to say, that has a sense of identity, but I don't think it has the scope and ambition of these games. And
it does have Darth Vader the shark, though.
Scorpion.
No, he's a shark, too, at another point.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay.
You're underwater. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, we're saying like there's nothing else that quite feels like these games, and I do think there is one game that that does actually capture the feeling of these games, and I think that's Shadows of the Empire.
Oh, isn't there an Indiana Jones game on Super Nintendo that was?
And it's weird because
there's two, I think, actually.
Yeah, because there's the Factor 5 made that Indiana Jones game, and that one feels just kind of like a standard platformer. It's kind of like a shittier Castlevania,
Okay.
which it's all right. Like it's fine, but it doesn't have the ambition and scope of these games.
See, I thought Factor 5 was involved in these a little bit too. Or did
I don't
Sculpture
think so.
turn it? Or no? Okay.
No, because they were Sculptured was an American developer, and Factor 5 was European. But their paths definitely, I'm sure, crossed.
Well, Factor 5's offices ended up being in America, though, right? I think like Julian Eckberg or Eckbrecht or whatever, like they started there, but I think they ended up like when they were making the Star Wars games that they made, they weren't making them in Europe. I don't think, were they? You know what? This is a tangent. It's a diversion.
Yeah.
This is not what we're here to talk about right now.
I do think Shadows of the Empire kind of carried the torch from these games in being like, we're going hard, like we're gonna be super ambitious. We want to capture every part of Star Wars. We want the shooting, we want the flying, we want, speeder bikes, we want space battles.
Yeah.
And they like really tried, and I think like in Shadows of the Empire has some of like the same kind of failings as these games in like it's some parts are play better than others, and like it's really hard, and but I think like that's the spirit of these games was kind of carried over into Shadows of the Empire. And then I think like for better or worse, like they kind of like LucasArts, Lucasfilm Games kind of realized like, no, we should just kind of like stick to like one thing in each game. Like, okay, this is going to be a space combat game. This is going to be like a third person shooter kind of game. And, they did kind of go back again, Factor 5, that the Rogue Leader, or
the third Rogue Squadron game on GameCube.
Yeah, and like tried to do it, and then it was like the same issues. Like, well, some of these parts, some of the stages are good, and then some are like really janky.
I think it's called Rebel Strike.
Rebel Strike, yeah. And but I mean, what we saw of Star Wars Outlaws does seem to be kind of like maybe this is going to be a like everything in the kitchen sink type Star Wars game, but through like, this is also a game that has 1,000 people working on it over the course of like 6 years. So maybe it will, and using a lot of standardized tech, whereas like, this game, Shadows of the Empire, they were like creating the engine from scratch, and the engine for like all these different types of gameplay and stuff. So I don't know, but it's a great into the trilogy. Yeah,
I was gonna say quickly too that I don't know if this one is available. Like, is this one available on PlayStation?
No,
I know Super Star Wars was,
only
right?
Super Star Wars is available on PS3 and PS4 and Vita.
Okay.
So I have.
But if it's on PS4, can you get it on PS5 or no?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But so anyway, like, it's cool that like the first one is available there. But like, I still, like I said it a few episodes ago or whatever, and we don't have time to talk about it again now. But like, I just really wish that somebody would make Star Wars games like this again. Not that like that they would ape or steal like the exact feel of these games or whatever, but just like make a 2D Star Wars game that doesn't, like lower budget, just less ambitious in terms of technology, but just make like a really cool 2D Star Wars game. I would love that. Ryan, were you able to find any, or did you? I gave you the notes kind of late. Did you find a favorite piece of Star Wars Return of the Jedi merchandise?
I do, and I have it with me. But I feel like I've been talking a lot, so why don't you go ahead and tell yours first?
Okay. I mean, I would preface this by saying, I guess, like, I think that there is a ton of great merchandise from this era. I think, obviously, uh, obviously, like all the Star Wars movies have been strongly merchandised, right? Like that's like a thing. Can you see this at all or no? Like, oh, there it
Yes,
is. Okay.
I see it.
Oh, that's the wrong window. That's not what I wanted to show. But maybe I'll just zoom in anyways, and it'll be all right. Yeah, kind of. There's a lot of Star Wars merchandise for all the movies. Obviously, like Star Wars merchandising is a huge part of the whole thing. But like Return of the Jedi, it just feels like I wasn't around. I was 1 year old when Return of the Jedi came out. But like it feels like Return of the Jedi, there was so much merch because when I went to my first Star Wars celebration and I was picking through these bins full of like, old merchandise, first off, my mind was blown. I could not believe what I was seeing. Like all of this Star Wars stuff, like all of this Star Wars merchandise is like in one place. And I'm looking at like thousands of items of Star Wars merchandise. It was unbelievable to me. But a lot of it was from Return of the Jedi. And at that point in 1999, a lot of it was still pretty cheap. I mean, I think this stuff was produced like on such a large scale that a lot of it is still fairly affordable overall. But yeah, I went through a ton of stuff. I mean, like Star Wars, Return of the Jedi pencil toppers and Return of the Jedi. There's the incredible glasses from Burger King. And like, there's so much great Return of the Jedi merch. But anyway, we found these wallets or billfolds from Return of the Jedi at Star Wars Celebration. And I remember buying a couple of these. And I had the Yoda one at the top there. I just pulled this from an eBay listing. But the Yoda one at the top with "May the Force be with you" repeatedly printed behind him there.
Yeah,
and,
that's like some punk lettering, too. It's like like crass lettering. Yep. Like it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like we got the stencils, you know what I mean? We're gonna go spray paint them somewhere. Yeah. But anyway, so I had that wallet and used it. That was my wallet from the time I was 17 until, I don't know, maybe at least 19 or something. Wow, and by the time I was done using it, it was all worn away. Like you could, there's barely any
those don't last.
Image left on it. Yeah. And there was also this Return. I don't remember if I had this one or not. I think maybe somebody else I was with at Celebration might have bought this one. But yeah, I think there's a ton of great merchandise with a lot of personality from that era of Return of the Jedi, and like I said, there's an abundance of it. There's a lot of it, so it's fun to hunt around for, fun to find at stuff like Star Wars Celebrations, and I enjoy perusing eBay for this kind of stuff as well. So that's another place to find those things too. What's your piece of Star Wars Return of the Jedi merch, Ryan?
So mine is something I picked up at a used bookstore a few years ago. It is the Return of the Jedi Illustrated Edition. It is like, it's essentially the novelization of this. Do you have this, John? Are you familiar with this?
I do not have that, no.
So it's, I mean, I can see right here, I paid $5 for this. Okay. So it does not break the bank. But it's the Return of the Jedi novelization. It has this amazing logo here.
Off-brand font, not approved by Lucasfilm licensing. Yep.
But it is, because it's the novelization. It's by James Caan. But then you have the illustrations by...
Oh, yeah, Joe Johnston and... I'm not sure how to pronounce...
Jamero.
Yeah, and the two primary concept artists for Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, and so then you go into it, and it's all the storyboard imagery
that's cool.
In the novelization, and there's like there's some scenes where they have trying to find one, but like you have, I don't know, this isn't the best example, but you have like these pictures from the storyboards, but like in some of them you'll have like the arrows and like the direction part in them, and it's like, I don't know, it's just like a really cool way to illustrate a novelization instead of doing like new pictures. Like you just have like these storyboard illustrations, and they have like A, B, like all like the storyboard-y stuff on them. I don't know. I just think it's a really cool random thing.
That's awesome. What's the publication date on that?
1983.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Cool. And you obviously
Yeah.
picked that up more recently, but
Yeah, first edition, June 1983.
oh wow, so like right when the movie came out, there was this
Yeah.
really great. Yeah, that's awesome. Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool.
So.
All right, Ryan. Well, why don't we kind of wrap the show up here by discussing the conclusion of Return of the Jedi? The final. I mean, we talked a lot, or we talked at least a little bit about the cross cutting between Endor, the space battle, and the throne room stuff between Vader, Luke, and the Emperor. But that sequence with those three characters in the throne room, to me, is my favorite part of the movie. It's one of my favorite things in Star Wars ever, and to me, it is the place where, or the time, the scene, whatever you want to say, in which, like, what Star Wars means and is, and what the core of Star Wars and its value system, belief system, whatever you want to say, is, was solidified. So to me, it's like the most important scene, or the most important kind of, little segment of any Star Wars movie, I think. I really, really love it. I think it's so crucial, and I think so much of what Star Wars has been about since is rooted in that final sequence. So I don't want to be hyperbolic, but I think to me, it's probably the most important, moment or moments in all of Star Wars. And I don't know if I think it'll always be that, to me, it is the foundational, because obviously the original Star Wars film, like, that's the foundation of Star Wars, right? Like, that's the first movie, everything sprang from that. But if we kind of take a step back from, for a long time, it was like Star Wars is these three movies, right? And there's books and there's comics and there's toys and there's all this other stuff. But like, really, like, what is the text of Star Wars? It's these three movies. Well, not anymore. Now there's 11 movies plus like multiple TV shows. Plus, so I mean, it's growing and growing and growing, right? And it's going to grow forever. And there's so much to it. And so I think it's almost like more important now than it was even then, that there's this foundational set of movies, but this foundational sequence that, to me, if you wanted to distill Star Wars down to like one thing, if I could take one scene, one segment of Star Wars and say, this is what Star Wars is, this is what Star Wars means, this is what matters in Star Wars, etc., I think it's all there in this concluding scene. Or it's not really one scene, but this concluding segment in Return of the Jedi. It's the most important thing to me. I love it so much. Now, I've been talking a lot, so I'll turn it over to you, but I think it could not have more of an impact. It could not be more important to Star Wars as a whole.
I mostly agree. I think it is what you just said, but more specifically to the Skywalker saga, which, I mean, is arguably the core of Star Wars, like the main Star Wars. But also now we are in this like era where like we're post Skywalker saga, and we do have like things, like I don't know like how much like Solo or The Mandalorian or Andor like really capture what is in this scene, and like they do in some aspects, but they're also like, okay, we're telling these stories that are like way over here now, both in like the types of stories and just like thematically. But I do think like the core of the Skywalker saga is here, because I think it resonates through the prequels and through the sequels as well. What you're kind of talking about here, and I don't know, like it probably could be argued that maybe this is like the best part of Star Wars right here. Even if like some things are like, yeah, we're not really like about that part of Star Wars, but I think like certainly for maybe even it would be better just to look at like George's Star Wars, like his 6 movies, I think do kind of all come back to what happens at the end of Return of the Jedi, because if you don't have, like, you have the stuff with the Emperor and the temptation to the dark side, and like the Emperor being like, well, I'm just going to do the same thing again that I did with Anakin Skywalker to you. And, break, like, Luke breaking that cycle. And then, I think without that, and without, like, the redemption of Anakin Skywalker, like, you don't, the prequels don't really mean anything. Like, without that, like, those movies, like, don't have an impact. And yeah, and I mean, it is like, there are, like, so many, I would say, of, like, George's core principles in just, like, storytelling. Like, this is the culmination of the hero's journey. In so many ways. I think it's, him achieving what he was set out to do in telling these stories.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I think from a moral perspective, from a belief system perspective, everything in Star Wars is contained there, because it's like, okay, well, if Luke looks at his gloved hand and thinks, like, I could become the worst version of myself, but I'm going to choose not to be. I'm going to choose to be the best version of myself. I'm going to choose to believe that I can be something else, something better. Like, that's in most of Star Wars stories, you know what I mean? Even if it's not, like, a Skywalker story, so I don't mean, like, necessarily just from a plot perspective where you can see like the connections plot wise to other things and, like, the other Star Wars films. I mean, just, like, from, like, what does Star Wars want to say to the world? Like, what does George want to do with these movies, right? Why create these myths? He talked about how he makes these movies for children, to kind of show them, like, he would say, like, at the time that he made the original Star Wars films, there weren't a lot of movies that were made for kids to kind of show kids, like, how they should view the world and maybe what kind of people they should aspire to be and stuff like that. I think, like, it's all here in this final sequence. So whether it's that, looking at his gloved hand saying, I could choose to become, evil. I could choose to become, like, so many, take that easy path like so many other people have. I'm going to choose something better, whether it's that, whether it's just the fact that, like, when being confronted with the opportunity to be, selfish and sort of save himself, he throws his weapon down and says, no, I'm not going to do that. Darth Vader's choice or Anakin's choice, or whatever you want to say, choice to save Luke in that moment. Even the Emperor's choices, like the Emperor, like, as you were saying before, like, just wanting to do the same thing over and over, and the villains in Star Wars, the forces of evil in Star Wars are always kind of, I feel like, have that singular, kind of path in mind. They're always trying to, kind of repeat that same manipulation or that same sort of selfishness. And then, like, I think about, like, stuff like The Last Jedi at the end when Luke shows up and it's like, his whole thing, like that whole conclusion of The Last Jedi. And of course, that's the same character we're talking about. So, like, it is directly, super directly connected. But it just felt so Star Wars anyways, whether it was Luke or it wasn't. The idea that the Jedi would outsmart the villain, by not killing them, by not attacking them, by choosing, like, nonviolence. I think, like, to The Rise of Skywalker, where Rey chooses to heal that snake in the cave in the beginning of the film, which is a motif or, an idea that's repeated multiple times later in the movie. But, like, the choice not to, attack and kill, but the choice to give something of herself to save that other creature. Like, I think, like, all that stuff it's just like, it's not that I'm saying, like, oh, when they wrote that scene, they were, basing it on what happened in this, but I just feel like it so strongly defines, like, what is important from a value perspective in Star Wars that you can see it in so many other places, to me. And Luke is, like, he's out, like, the Emperor is way more powerful than him. the Emperor's pointing out the window saying, I've got this whole fleet, you know, all you've got are your dorky little friends on Endor who think they've outsmarted me and they haven't done, you know, anything. Like it's all, he's all up against it. And still his belief in himself, his belief in his friends, and his insistence on kind of, you know, following the path of the light here in this final sequence. It's like he believes in that, he puts his faith in that, and he comes through. And I think you even see that kind of stuff in something like Andor or Rogue One, which is not so closely linked plot wise, or even like they're pretty different types of stories. But like when it comes down to it, you know, like the final scene on Ferrix and in the end of Andor, I feel like, man, I'm getting the same kind of feelings. I'm getting the same kind of emotions. And I feel like there's a connection there. And I guess too, it's just like maybe part of the thing for me is like, whenever I think of this scene, or a lot of times when I think of this scene, I think about what it could have been, the antithesis of what it is, you know, which is like, and Mark Hamill's talked about it. Lawrence Kasdan's talked about it a little bit. And I was reading in the Making of Return of the Jedi, looking at some of the notes from the story sessions when they were breaking the story, Marquand and Lucas and Lawrence Kasdan, and like, well, maybe he should kill Vader, or maybe he should put Vader's helmet on and say, I'm Darth Vader now, and like, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, I always think about that, like where this could have gone, you know, like Luke is confronting his father. Obi-Wan said, kill your father. He refuses to do it. You know what I mean? Like the typical conclusion to a movie like this is like Luke confronts the Emperor and Luke kills the Emperor, but he doesn't, right? And the only reason the Emperor is defeated is not because Darth Vader decides, you know what, I've had enough of you manipulating me for all these decades, I'm going to strangle you and kill you. Like, it's not that. It's that he's watching the Emperor, you know, kill his son, and he has to stop that, right? And so it is I guess it's like a slightly violent act, or a kind of violent act, you know, when he tosses him down that thing, but it's an act of like, he's saving somebody else. That's what he's doing in that moment, you know? So it's just like, yeah, I don't know how bold I don't know if it was like a super bold choice in 1983 to say like, this movie's not going to end with like the typical, you know, hero vanquishing the evil kind of thing that, you know, you would have expected. I feel like it was, but regardless of whether it was or it wasn't, it's just like, to me, a defining choice, and it could have gone other ways, but I feel like, you know, and back to what you were saying a few minutes ago about the George's Star Wars. I think George's Star Wars is this, you know? Yeah. George's Star Wars is this, but at least, you know, most of the time, or for the time being, I feel like the people who are telling other Star Wars besides George's Star Wars are kind of committed to sticking to the thing that George was trying to accomplish from a super zoomed out, like, larger perspective. What kind of message do we want to put out into the world? What kind of like impact do we want Star Wars to have? I think to me, it all comes back to this.
Yeah. And I think there's like this extra layer of complexity in the interpersonal relationships between Darth Vader, Luke, and the Emperor. And I think that's what makes this special, is because just the layers there with, you know, Anakin Skywalker has been manipulated by the Emperor, and, you know, what will it take for him to finally have enough? And, like, you know, there are those conversations between Luke and Darth Vader where, you know, Luke is saying, like, I know there's still good in you, and like all of this through, like, in like the last part of the film, and, you know, there's also like there's a lightsaber battle and everything, but I think this scene is better for exactly, you know, the reason that you said. It's not just like Luke cutting down the Emperor and then, like, you know, the audience like cheering because like the bad guy is gone. It is like this extra layer of you know, the Anakin's reaction to it. And so, and that's where, like, I kind of feel like it's really hard to say that, like, this is, you know, the essence of Star Wars that you know, is still being followed today, because you do have stuff like, Rise of Skywalker, that it's like, once again, it's the Emperor, and it is just like Rey just like killing him without like the any like extra layers. Like, it is just like the hero like killing the villain at the end. Or
Well, I would disagree because she doesn't. She just holds her lightsaber up and reflects back on him his lightning that he's shooting at her. Like, she doesn't strike him down. She doesn't kill him. She doesn't what was the phrase Colin Trevorrow used? She doesn't take advantage of her necessary rage or whatever it was that he described in his script of what she was going to do. But anyway,
it's same difference. Like,
I don't think so at all. I don't think so. But
okay. Well, that's like the Disney villain way of dying. Then, like, he kills himself or whatever. But like, it's not as textured as this.
No. I don't think the battle between Rey and the Emperor in The Rise of Skywalker is on the level of this one. No.
Yeah. But it's like it's a much more simplified kind of rhyme to this fight.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so I don't know.
I just don't think what's important to me though is like I can't think of any example in any, not just The Rise of Skywalker, but like any big Star Wars conclusion or any big Star Wars story that contradicts the values of this. You know what I mean? Like, if it really was like the end of The Rise of Skywalker was just her being like, dude, I'm going into badass mode and I'm going to kill that freaking Empire right now, or Emperor right now. Like, that to me would be like, whoa, what's going on? Because that doesn't feel like what like Star Wars is about. And I can't think of it. I mean, I don't know. That's like almost like the perspective of this, like the viewpoint of this is almost like something like a litmus test to me for like Star Wars stories. Like, I don't like actively like literally compare it to the end of Return of the Jedi, like a Star Wars movie, but I think whether or not something works for me, or like a Star Wars story or whatever, whether or not something works for me, I do kind of like maybe subconsciously, or, like I feel like it has to fit into, and I know you probably don't necessarily agree with me on that, which is okay, but like I feel like it has to kind of fit within the confines of this, the worldview that's crystallized in this conclusion. It's not just about like this scene, but I even feel like Star Wars and Empire. You said a few minutes ago, the prequels, if it weren't for this, the prequels wouldn't really mean anything because it's all building up to this moment or whatever, right? Like, to me, it's like Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. They have a perspective. They have a value system. It's very much in line with all of this, right? Like, it's not like these are new ideas that are just being created in the moment or something. But I feel like if this went a different way, it would almost like undo, or maybe undo is not the right word, but like I feel like this solidifies what the original trilogy is about. This solidifies what George wanted to do with these movies in a really important way. And yeah, I just feel like I whether I'm thinking about like any of the Star Wars movies that follow, if I'm thinking about any of the Star Wars shows, or, any of the major Star Wars stories, I feel like they're either demonstrating why the kind of values in this scene, they're demonstrating those values, or they're maybe telling a cautionary tale about not sticking on this path, or whatever it may be. So, but I feel like I always kind of feel like these values being upheld in Star Wars storytelling, and I just think that if this movie, Return of the Jedi, ended differently, then that wouldn't be what Star Wars is about. And I don't know what Star Wars storytelling, after that would have maybe been about or focused on. But I think like this really set, to me anyway, it's just my opinion, but I think this really like set the path for like what Star Wars stories would aspire to communicate to audiences, or, the kind of the goal, not the goalpost, but like I think what Kathleen Kennedy's talked about this, like there's like certain rails, like guardrails or whatever. I think she's talked about this with certain filmmakers or storytellers who, you know, they hired and then they didn't stick with or whatever. Like you're trying to move Star Wars outside of the established kind of rails that we have for it, which, you know, might sound limiting, and some people might say that's not a good thing, but to me, I really like it because I feel like, yeah, like this scene is the primary example of like kind of establishing like what does Star Wars mean, what does it believe in, and you know, you have a lot of latitude to tell Star Wars stories in a lot of different directions, but it shouldn't contradict what Star Wars believes in. And to me, this scene really demonstrates what Star Wars is about.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think like, you know, you talk to 10 different people about what Star Wars means, and you're going to get 10 different answers. I do think, and again, like I think because they are like the different endpoints for the Skywalker saga, like the stuff communicated here is why I so strongly dislike The Rise of Skywalker, in that the way, like, I mean, I think like obviously like bringing the emperor back is dumb to begin with, but after this scene, because it does kind of like take some of the impact of all of this, but I also think like the way this movie approaches redemption, and you know, that was like the whole thing going into Rise of Skywalker, like will Ben Solo die? Will he be redeemed? How is it going to happen? And you know, like, will it be, you know, subverted in some sort of way? How are they going to handle that? You know, because you have, and then there was like the whole debate, like, well, no, he killed all these people, so he definitely needs to die in this movie. Like, he has to die. And then like there are people be like, well, wouldn't it be interesting if he lived and, you know, had to kind of carry that burden? And, you know, I think they kind of took the less interesting route with that for me. But I do think in, like, the case of, like, Anakin here, like, I mean, he was, like, at a logical endpoint of his life regardless. Like, because he had just been in, you know, machine form for so long, then he's an old man at this point. So it does feel, you know, a little different here for him to like die, you know, but finding redemption and then dying. But you know, that is another, I think, core part of Star Wars.
Yeah. And, you know, as far as Rise of Skywalker is concerned, I think anyone who thinks that Ben dying at the end of that movie is the less interesting route to take, sure. Yeah, it could, you know, I mean, I can completely see that argument. But I don't see the ending of The Rise of... let me put it this way. I see the ending of The Rise of Skywalker and what happens with Ben very much echoing the values of this conclusion, because he's not... He doesn't die like because the movie punishes him, in my opinion anyways. It's not like they're punishing him like, you did all this bad stuff, so now like some other character is going to kill you to punish you for what you did. In his final moments, he chooses to give, you know, his whatever he has left to save Rey, because Rey is dead, and he sacrifices himself and gives that up to her. To me, that's not like, oh man, and it could be like you're saying, it could be that like the filmmakers or whoever were like, well, we set him up, he's too bad, we got to kill him, whatever. But like, to me, that movie doesn't kill him like in an act of punishment. If anything, he achieves, almost like Luke in The Last Jedi. Like, Luke is achieving like next level Jediism by, you know, channeling everything he's got into that moment to pull off that whatever. In Rise of Skywalker, you see Rey give herself to that snake creature a little bit. You see BB-8 give himself a little bit to Dio. You know, Rey kills Ben, realizes it was an awful thing to do, gives herself, you know, to Ben, and then ultimately at the end of the movie, you know, Ben does the same thing. So, you know, whether it was a good way to end the movie, whether it was an interesting way to end the movie, maybe not, but I mean, I think so, but I understand not thinking that. But I personally do not interpret that as, Ben, the bad guy, is being punished for all the awful things he did. I think it's Ben, who was a bad guy, realizing, like, just like Anakin Skywalker, who was a bad guy, the most beautiful thing I could do, and the most pure way that he could achieve some level of redemption or whatever, is to make a sacrifice of himself. You know what I mean? Not just to make a sacrifice of himself. And so that's what Anakin does. That's what Luke does at the end of The Last Jedi. I think that's what Ben does at the end of Rise of Skywalker. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah, I think it's just like to me, it still just feels like a weird, like, fumbly way to kind of echo something that already happened that was just done a lot better in Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, but how do I put this? I can't think of any movies, like, any, to take it away from Rise of Skywalker, but just in general, like, they all, like, I feel like so far anyways have maintained, like, this belief system, and, like, I think, like, even some of the stuff that's gotten canceled or tossed out or whatever is like, you can't I don't know, I shouldn't say you can't contradict, but, like, you shouldn't spit in the face of this thing that established, like, what Star Wars really believes in,
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, Solo is, like, the way that movie kind of wraps up, like, it is, but, like, that feels like a different sort of thing, because you're getting, like, why is Han Solo a dick? Well, like, here's why. And I wouldn't say that, like...
Yeah, his choice to kill Beckett, that's, it was one where you're like, okay, well, he had to do that, but that, I guess, maybe falls a little bit outside of what the scene in Return of the Jedi is kind of arguing, right?
Yeah, but, I mean, I think, like, there's whether or not, like, Rise of Skywalker was successful in it, like, there was an attempt to kind of, like, bring these sort of ideas around redemption and everything full circle. I think, like, I mean, I think it's something that permeates through the prequels, which are, like, setting up the redemption, and, like, Anakin has, like, mini redemption arcs, even, like, through episodes 2 and 3, and then I do think, like, maybe the modern Platonic idea of all of this redemption, sacrifice, and everything is in The Last Jedi, with, like, what Luke does, and even just, like, the hints at, like, the playing with the conflict within Ben, and, like, oh, no one's truly evil, kind of things. I think, like, the sacrifices that Rose makes, and all of that, like, I feel like that movie, like, really effectively captures the ideas here.
I can't remember why, but Elliot and I watched the scene where Luke shows up and, like, talks to Leia. Oh, because he was looking at my tattoo. He was like, I have a tattoo. I have a tattoo of Leia, and I have the line from The Last Jedi, "No one's ever really gone." And he was like, "When does she say that?" And I was like, "Well, here's a teachable moment. You know what I mean? Here's an opportunity for education." She doesn't say that. And then we watched the scene on my phone just real quick, and I was like, just blown away all over again. Like, I've seen that scene so many times, but we watched it, and I was like, I turned to him when it was over, and I was like, and Elliot, there are people who try to tell you this is not an incredible movie. Like, what on earth,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just goosebumps. And then, like, I think the thing, I mean, there was every little moment of that scene is amazing, but, like, the way he clasps her hand, and then, like, when he removes his hand, she's holding Han's dice, like, after, oh my God, it's just so well done.
Out of control.
Yeah. almost on the level of the ending of Return of the Jedi, a fantastic Star Wars movie. So, Ryan, any final thoughts on Richard Marquand's masterpiece, Return of the Jedi, before we wrap up here?
It's a weird one. I think it has some of the highest highs of the original trilogy, and it also has some lows. Maybe the lowest lows of the trilogy. Some parts that drag. It meanders a bit. It doesn't have the punchy pacing that you would expect from Star Wars. It tries, it's a really ambitious film to try to wrap up this big story. It's trying to be like a deeply serious film at times, telling like a very serious story with like really strong themes that are trying to be communicated here. And then sometimes it's like trying to be Indiana Jones and like just this like Saturday morning matinee jaunt, and then like sometimes it's like trying to be this like movie for kids with just like very silly creatures doing ridiculous things. Honestly, the movie it reminds me the most of is the next Star Wars movie that George would make, with The Phantom Menace. Like, there are just a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I feel like, it's in some ways the most earnest movie of the original trilogy, and like most earnest and least sophisticated, But then, like, I feel like there is a lot of sophistication in what it tries to do at the end, or what it does, not tries to do, what it does successfully at the end of the movie. But it's also very earnest and almost like uncool. You know what I mean? Like, it's not trying to be like smart. Well, that's not the right way. It's not trying to be like super clever. It's not trying to be like super, because like Star Wars like established this whole thing, right? And it's like this monumental moment in film history. It's an amazing movie, and widely considered one of the greatest movies of all time, right? It's like in that conversation, and it's just so foundational and so important to movies in general. And then I think The Empire Strikes Back, like many of us would argue, like, man, that's even like a better movie, a more well executed movie, just a really, really, really well made film. And so like, maybe Star Wars is the most important, maybe Empire is the best of the original trilogy. And then I feel like Return of the Jedi is oftentimes kind of like, people love it, and everybody loves the whole original trilogy, but I definitely feel like it's the one that gets the least sort of, critical love, or the one that's talked about the least as being like a great movie or whatever. And I mean, that's kind of probably how I feel. I feel like Star Wars is super important. I feel like Empire is the best made one. But then I also like, I just really, really appreciate how earnest and how, I think earnest is the word, how earnest Return of the Jedi is. Like, it's not even necessarily trying to be like, we're going to make a movie just as good as Empire. I think it's just really trying to tell a pure Star Wars adventure with some really pure Star Wars ideas. And so it ends up being a little more simple in comparison to something like, Empire, for sure. But I love that too, so I just appreciate it for its earnestness, straightforwardness, and for its I feel like it has a heart on its sleeve kind of nature, you know what I mean? And I like that.
Yeah, I think it's like one of George's best scripts. I think I just think the execution isn't always there. Like, I don't think it's as, all respect to Richard, who took on an impossible task that like even like Spielberg and David Lynch were like, no way, absolutely not. No. Like, it was an impossible task, and I think I think him and the crew like did their very best, but I think like it just, you know, because on paper like it's so good, and you know, talking about some of these scenes, and then like, but then it was like the experience of like rewatching it where there are like parts where I was like, man, this really drags, like even like knowing the movie front to back, it's like, man, where is this even going right now? Like it just meanders a lot, and it's just not quite as like punchy as you know, the other films in the saga. So I don't know. So it's a weird one. It's good, but you know, not one of my favorites.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we ought to wrap it up here, Ryan. So we'll be back soon with another episode of the Blockade Runner podcast. I got to go to Mexico first for a little while, so that's going to be fun, I hope. But yeah, maybe next week, later on in the week after the holidays come and gone, the 4th of July, we'll come back pretty soon after that probably, and do another episode of the Blockade Runner podcast here. Until then, you can find everything we do at blockaderunnerpodcast.com. If you want to share your thoughts on Return of the Jedi, you can email the show, blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow the show on Twitter at blockaderun. Ryan, listeners can follow you on Twitter at
Viamalay, VAYAMALAY, and Standard Definition Gaming, DEFSTAN 480.
And I believe you said there's some Return of the Jedi footage, Super Return of the Jedi footage up there on.
Sure is.
All right,
sure
cool.
Is.
So check that out. I'll try to link to that in the show notes if I can do that. And also we have our Discord community. If you're a Discord user, you should join our Discord community and talk to us about Star Wars there. And there is a link to do that in the show notes and on the website. So. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I am a Jedi like my father before me.